The U.S. Navy was terrified of the Pacific Ocean. It was a vast, empty void where an entire enemy fleet could hide. After the Washington Naval Treaty of 1922, the world's great powers had agreed to limit the size and number of their battleships. This meant that every single battleship was now incredibly precious. To lose one in a surprise attack was to lose the entire strategic game. And in the 1920s and 30s, a battleship was blind. Before radar, your multi-million-dollar warship could be just over the horizon from an enemy fleet, and you would never know. The only eyes you had were clunky float planes launched by catapult from the deck. They were slow, couldn't fly far, and trying to recover them by landing on the ocean and being winched aboard was a nightmare in anything but a dead calm sea. The Navy desperately needed an eye in the sky, something that could stay airborne for days, not hours, something that could scout thousands of square miles of ocean at a time. This obsession was born from the First World War. American naval commanders had watched in horror as German Zeppelins crossed the North Sea, shrugged off anti-aircraft fire, and dropped bombs on London. They were terrifying, high-altitude ghosts. The Navy wasn't just impressed, it was convinced that the nation who mastered the giant rigid airship would rule the next war. And the program had a champion, a father. His name was Rear Admiral William A. Moffett. He was the charismatic, iron-willed chief of the Navy's brand-new Bureau of Aeronautics. Moffett saw the future, and to him it was lighter than air. He famously declared, "The future of naval warfare lies in the air." He fought Congress, he fought skeptical Navy admirals, and he won. He secured the funding for an audacious experiment, 2 massive rigid airships. The contract went to the Goodyear Zeppelin Corporation, a joint venture with the German experts who had built the wartime terrors. In Akron, Ohio, they built a structure so large that it was at the time the biggest building in the world without any internal supports, the Goodyear Air Dock. It was so vast that it had its own weather, with rain clouds forming near the ceiling. And inside, 2 giants were born, the USS Akron and her sister ship, the USS Macon. These were not flimsy blimps. They were true zeppelins, with intricate, massive skeletons of a new lightweight metal called duralumin. This skeleton held 12 massive gas cells, which would be filled with 7 million cubic feet of helium. This is a critical point. Everyone thinks of the Hindenburg disaster, but that was a German ship filled with explosive hydrogen. The United States had a global monopoly on helium, a safe, non-flammable gas. These American ships theoretically could not burn. They were technological marvels. They had 8 massive 560 horsepower engines that were reversible, meaning they could back up or stop in midair. They had a full galley, mess halls, sleeping quarters for 60 men, and a radio room that could transmit messages across the Atlantic. But deep inside their 13-story tall halls, hidden from view, was Admiral Moffett's true secret, the one that separated these ships from anything that had come before. The weapon that he believed would change warfare forever.
This was Admiral Moffett's secret. The weapon he believed would change naval warfare forever. Hidden deep inside the hull was an internal hangar, a 75-foot-long, 60-foot-wide chamber that was a fully functioning airbase. And it held 5 brand-new, custom-built biplanes, the Curtiss F9C Sparrowhawk. They were tiny, almost comically small, with a wingspan of just 25 feet. They were chosen because they were small enough to fit through the hangar doors, but powerful enough to be a genuine fighter. But a hangar is useless if you can't get the planes out. And this is where the system elevated from ambitious to pure, unadulterated madness. Engineers built one of the most ingenious and terrifying devices in aviation, the sky trapeze. Here's how it worked, and it's crazier than you can imagine. The pilot would climb into his Sparrowhawk inside the hangar. The plane itself would be attached to a trolley on the ceiling. This trolley would move the plane, like a piece of cargo, to the center of the hangar, right over a massive T-shaped hole in the floor. A klaxon would sound. The T-shaped bomb bay doors would slide open, revealing the world 3,000 feet below. Then the trapeze itself, a large metal triangle, would be lowered into the opening. The pilot, already strapped in,
would be hooked onto this trapeze and then lowered out of the ship, dangling in the 100-mile-per-hour slipstream. Imagine the pilot. He's in his cockpit, in the open air. But he's not flying. He's a fish on a line, being buffeted by hurricane-force winds. His engine is off. Then he'd get the signal. He'd start his engine, the propeller roaring to life just yards beneath the airship's flammable gas cells. He'd brace himself and pull a lever. Clack! The skyhook on his top wing would disengage. He would drop, free-falling, for a sickening second before his tiny wings bit into the air, and he was finally flying free. The parasite fighter was loose. It could fly for 3 hours, scouting hundreds of miles beyond the airship's own range, or it could form a defensive screen, protecting its mothership from attack. But this wasn't even the hard part. The hard part was getting back. To return, the pilot had to fly his small, twitchy biplane underneath the 785-foot-long airship, which was still moving at 60 miles per hour. He had to match its speed perfectly, flying in formation with a moving skyscraper, fighting the violent, turbulent air called the burble that roiled underneath the massive hull. He had no landing gear. To save weight and add a 30-gallon fuel tank, the wheels were permanently removed. There was no plan B. You either hooked the trapeze or you were lost at sea. The pilot would aim his skyhook for the trapeze. One pilot, Swede Momsen, described the experience as trying to spear a potato with a fork in the dark during an earthquake. If he missed, he could slam into the trapeze, or worse, the belly of the airship. If he hit it, clank! The hook would lock on. The pilot would cut his engine, and his plane would become a dead weight, instantly. The trapeze operator, seeing the catch, would begin to lift. The pilot and his plane would be hauled, wings vertical, back up through the T-shaped doors and into the warm, safe hangar. The crew would refuel, rearm, and be ready to launch again. The pilots themselves were a special breed. They called themselves the men on the flying trapeze. It was, without question, the most demanding, high-stakes flying in the world. For a brief, shining moment, the dream worked. The Akron and Macon participated in naval exercises. In one 1934 war game, the Macon launched her planes, found the enemy fleet, and theoretically bombed them, all while remaining completely undetected. The flying aircraft carrier was a success. Until it wasn't.
The greatest enemy of the airship was never a battleship or a fighter plane. It was the one thing its designers could never control: the weather. On the night of April 3rd, 1933, the USS Akron was on a mission to calibrate a radio direction finder station off the coast of New England. Admiral Moffett himself was on board. He wasn't supposed to be. It was a last-minute decision. He wanted to be with his men, to see his creation in action. The weather forecast was bad. A deep, powerful low-pressure system was moving up the coast. The Akron's commander, Frank McCord, was warned, but he believed he could use the storm's winds to his advantage, to ride the storm, a common practice for airships. It was a fatal miscalculation. Just after midnight, off the coast of New Jersey, the Akron flew into the black heart of the storm. This was no ordinary turbulence. The massive ship was caught in a brutal, violent downdraft, a column of air pushing the ship down faster than its 8 engines could push it up. Her captain fought the controls. He ordered full power, the engines screaming in protest. But the 785-foot giant was simply overpowered. The altimeter spun backwards. The lower tail fin slammed into the storm-tossed Atlantic. With a sound like a bomb, the Akron was torn to pieces. The mainframe snapped. The helium cells ruptured. The entire massive structure collapsed into the freezing ocean in seconds. It was so fast, the radio man was in the middle of capping out a distress signal when the ship hit the water. It was never completed.
The ship had no life rafts. It had been considered safer than the sea. The crew was dumped into 30-foot waves. Of the 76 men on board, 73 were killed, including Admiral Moffett. The father of the program was gone, swallowed by the very ocean he had sought to command from the sky. It was the deadliest air crash in history. The disaster sparked a national scandal. Congress demanded to know why the Navy's flagship, its $50 million Marvel, was destroyed. But with Moffett's death, the program lost its most powerful defender. The dream was dying. Now, all hope rested on the sister ship, the USS Macon. The Macon was based in California, the new Queen of the Pacific. She was more advanced. She had learned from the Akron's tragedy. She was now equipped with new life vests and life rafts for her entire crew. But she was also flying with a hidden, unrepaired wound. Weeks earlier, during a rough storm, a piece of her upper tail fin had been damaged. A full repair was scheduled, but naval exercises were deemed more important. A temporary fix was applied. On February 12, 1935, the Macon was returning from fleet maneuvers, heading for her base at Moffett Field. Like her sister ship, she was hit by a sudden, violent gust of wind off the coast of Big Sur. The wind caught the weakened, poorly repaired tail fin and ripped it clean off. The broken girders of the fin tore through the rear gas cells. The Macon was now mortally wounded. She was losing her helium. She was going down. But this was not the Akron. The Macon's commander, Herbert Wiley, was a survivor. In fact, he was one of the 3 men who had miraculously survived the Akron disaster. He would not let it happen again. He remained perfectly calm. He ordered the crew to dump fuel and ballast. The ship, now lightened, began a slow, controlled 20-minute descent instead of a catastrophic plunge. There was no panic. The crew calmly deployed the new life rafts and donned their life vests. They stood at their stations. When the Macon settled gently onto the Pacific, the waiting rescue ships had an incredible sight. Nearly the entire crew floating calmly in organized groups. Of the 83 men on board, 81 survived. It was a testament to the lessons learned. It was a masterpiece of airmanship and discipline. But it was also the end.
The Navy had lost both of its flying aircraft carriers. The public and Congress had lost their nerve. The entire $50 million rigid airship program was canceled. The dream of the flying aircraft carrier was over. Ultimately, the Akron and Macon were a brilliant solution to a problem that was about to vanish. Within a few short years, 2 new technologies would make them completely obsolete: long-range radar and the conventional sea-based aircraft carrier, which would soon rule the very oceans the airships were built to scout. What if they had survived? Could a fleet of Macons have scouted the Japanese fleet before Pearl Harbor? We will never know. Today, the Akron and Macon are a forgotten chapter of history, but their legacy is still visible. Moffett Field, in the heart of what would become Silicon Valley, is named for the admiral who died on the Akron. The massive Hangar 1, built for the Macon, still stands. The Goodyear Air Dock in Ohio, where the giants were born, is still one of the largest buildings in the world. And in 1991, the wreck of the USS Macon was found lying 1,500 feet below the waves in the Monterey Bay. Inside its crumbling hangar, the 4 lost Sparrowhawk biplanes were found, still in their racks, forever waiting for a mission that would never come. They were a magnificent, daring, and flawed experiment. A reminder of a time when the Navy didn't just rule the seas, but reached for the clouds. But the story of military airships didn't end there. A different kind of airship, the smaller, simpler blimp, would soon prove vital in World War II, hunting the one thing that terrified the Allies: